Great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Bilateral Bites, the Australia-India Institute Delhi special vodcast. This time for 2021, we're bringing an exciting double-barrel Republic Day series focusing on India's economy and India's foreign policy, respectively. 2020 was a year like no other in recent history, testing countries around the world in terms of pandemic preparedness, economic robustness, but also foreign policy in a year of tumultuous change. India certainly was tested on foreign policy, particularly with an increase in Chinese aggression and an unpredictable United States. Now, as we move into 2021, we are delighted to invite Ashok Malik as our special guest on Foreign Policy and Republic Day. Ashok Malik was one of the Distinguished Fellows of ORF, is a renowned leading public intellectual and former journalist. He has held distinguished and esteemed roles within the government in India, holding the honor of Press Secretary to President Ram Nath Kovind until recently, and is now advisor to the Indian Foreign Ministry. Ashok Malik, welcome to Bilateral Bites.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And this is a double-barrel commemoration in another way because Republic Day in India coincides with Australia Day. And so congratulations to Australia as well on an important event that's coming up.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. It's yet another one of those coincidences that celebrates the friendship of Australia and India with great synergy, I find. I wanted to ask you a bit about India's horizons for 2021. India in 2020, from a foreign policy perspective, was impressive. From the very beginning, we saw all countries being tested by the COVID pandemic. Yet very early on, India began leading both in its neighborhood with SAARC leadership in preparedness for a response to COVID, calling for the G20 extraordinary virtual summit to see how the G20 leaders could deal with COVID together, launching Atmanirbhar Bharat, which allowed it to produce PPE and pharmaceuticals at levels that helped out many countries, hundreds of countries around the world in their response to COVID as well, and myriad other high officers within international relations, including chairing the executive board of the World Health Organization, certainly hosting the G20 soon in 2023, and maintaining its commitments to climate change, including with a resounding speech at the UN Climate Ambition Summit just in December. What can we expect to hear from India in 2021?
Well, as you said, 2020 has been a year like no other. It's been one of the, I'd say, 4 or 5 most challenging years in post-independence history for India, perhaps the most challenging. Mm-hmm. In 2021, we'd like to build on the lessons of 2020, the very sobering lessons of 2020. First, of course, we have to put the pandemic behind us in a decisive way by rolling out vaccines. The plan is to roll out vaccines to 300 million frontline workers and seriously vulnerable populations by the middle of this month or middle of this year, and then go further. And in essence, break the back of the virus. We hope to be able to do that, and that will set us on a path to a more open economy, open up tourism, services sector, and so on. Second, the economy has taken a knock. It's starting to recover, but it will still end in March this year, when our financial year concludes, because we have a financial year from April 1 to March 31. It will end with negative growth, and this is the first time would have had negative growth in 40 years. So that is a shock to the system. There will be recovery in the coming year because the negative growth this year has been an anomaly and an aberration, and so we will correspondingly have high growth next year, which will also be, in a sense, an aberration, but it will also show some recovery. But for the economy to really come back on track will take till 2022. And how quickly and how robustly it comes back on track will depend on what we do this year. One of the lessons from 2020, the lessons all of us face, was how dependent we are on some countries and some geographies for sourcing even what are everyday pieces of equipment like medicines or ventilators, masks, and so on, PPEs. So the battle in the past year has been to build diversified sourcing chains or supply chains, including building capacities at home. So, for instance, we made no PPEs at home in March 2020. Today, you have over 100 companies making PPEs. Many of those companies were perhaps making raincoats earlier, and when the economy recovers, they'll go back to making raincoats. But maybe 30 of those 100 will stay with PPEs and will continue to manufacture PPEs and build domestic capacities and contribute to global supplies. Similarly, with ventilators, we had no companies making ventilators. Now we have about 50. Many of them are automobile companies that have diversified and opened up a new production. Now, some will go back to automobile components or auto components, but some will stay with ventilators or medical devices as a new production line. We're not the only country experimenting with this or looking at more realistically at diversified supply chains, both domestically and in partnership with other countries such as Australia. I know Australia is looking at this, other countries across the world are looking at this. And this will help us build more robust capacities within our own economy domestically. It's a challenge, but it will also lead to more opportunities. And of course, the bigger challenges as we ramp up the economy, we have to be alive to climate change. India's done a lot to keep to its Paris commitments. In fact, in renewable energy generation, we've exceeded our Paris commitments. But we recognize, as the Prime Minister said recently, that we need to be even more ambitious, as all countries do, because we are headed towards another round of global economic rebuilding post-COVID, and we have to ensure it's green rebuilding. Finally, of course, security concerns in the broader Indo-Pacific and in South Asia, which is our neck of the woods, our geography, and in a sense also your geography. We face challenges. We face challenges in the Himalayas when there was a mobilization of Chinese troops, which was frankly unprecedented and called into question a lot of the postulates on the basis of which India and China have been cooperating all these years, that peace and tranquility at the border would be ensured. Peace and tranquility was not ensured, and so there are question marks there. We've stood our ground, but we are watchful, and I suspect in 2021, both terrestrially and in the maritime domain, which we share with Australia, we will be much more watchful.
You covered a lot of very interesting ground there, starting, I think, with China. The reason I bring China now is because you spoke both of the security dimensions terrestrially as well as maritime, which again, we're working on in an Indo-Pacific context. You spoke obviously of the border skirmishes, which was a real aggression that we saw from China, with India taking genuinely violent brunt from that assault. And you also spoke about the diversification of supply chains, which seemed to give India great impetus and in fact brilliant agility in the way that it was able to turn around some of its existing production to respond to the need for PPE. It makes me think more broadly about some of the democracies that have genuinely seemed to have struggled in 2020. And of course, the United States has come under extraordinary pressure in terms of its democratic institutions in recent times. We've seen the United States tested as in an almost unprecedented way, and for all of us as strong allies of the United States to witness as well. We've also seen President Biden now sworn in, taking on leadership. Prime Minister Modi has demonstrated himself to be an extraordinary ally of the US, enjoying a quite strong relationship in the Obama era. Got on very well with Trump, it seemed, including hosting Trump as well during his time, and by all standards seems to be looking towards a very positive relationship with the Biden era as well. I wanted to seek your views on whether the Biden era is ushering in any new or recent change, given that the vice president this year will also be have some Indian origin. And in fact, there seems to be a growing interest to make for an increasingly diverse set of very high leading officials within the White House, including many from the Indian diaspora. Do you think this will further strengthen the US-India relationship?
Look, the Biden administration has certainly made a conscious effort to reflect the rainbow that is American society. And that rainbow, of course, includes the American community of Indian origin, of South Asian Indian origin. And that community has done well for itself, especially in technology, academia, business, banking, healthcare, medicine, and so on. And you find a lot of people now graduating to public office from just economic and technocratic positions to actually elected office. And of course, Vice President Kamala Harris represents the apex of that process. While we are happy for them and we are happy for their achievement in America, the fact is they are American public officials. Kamala Harris is the Vice President of the United States. Her mandate is to uphold and protect the interests of the United States. Having said that, what helps in any bilateral relationship is familiarity with the strengths and attributes of the other country. And this familiarity and this recognition of the strengths and attributes of the other country could come in a variety of ways. It could come through a history of engagement with that country. It could come through having served in the country as maybe a diplomat. It could come with family and educational links. And certainly we do hope that Vice President Harris's deep knowledge of India will contribute to strengthening our bilateral relationship even further. This relationship has a strength and a resilience that is often under-recognized, because it's not just Prime Minister Modi having got along with President Obama, then President Trump. Frankly, from the mid-1990s, you had changes in government in India, BJP, Congress, then BJP again. You had changes in government in the United States. President Clinton, then President Bush, then President Obama, and then President Trump, and now President Biden. You've had Democrats, Republicans, Democrats back again, Republicans again, and now Democrats again. But we've always had a very strong bilateral agenda. Of course, different presidents have different priorities. So the Paris Climate Change Agreement saw a great deal of cooperation between President Obama and Prime Minister Modi. President Trump walked away from Paris. India adhered to its Paris commitments and stood by them. President Biden has brought the US back into Paris, and we are glad. But different presidents, as I said, will have different priorities, but there's so much India and the US do together that there will always be common ground between any US president and India. And on certain fundamentals, such as a growing defense relationship, a free and open, a secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific, on strategic alignment in many theaters and many domains, including the technology domain, which is now emerging, on cooperation in innovation and technology, and now healthcare. On such issues, frankly, irrespective of who the president is, the relationship has just grown. And when the term Indo-Pacific was first used, in fact, I first heard it in Australia in the early years of the century. It sounded like some sort of a neologism we'd never come up with. Someone smart had come up with, and there were lots of questions and doubts about it. Today, it's so commonplace. Everyone accepts it. President Obama's team spoke about it. President Trump spoke about it and took it forward. And the Biden administration has been talking about it as well. So there is so much common ground that, quite frankly, irrespective of who's in office in India or the US, we will have a lot to do with each other. And that gives us a lot of solace and a lot of satisfaction. We are confident we can work with any American administration because, as I said, the countries need each other.
No, that's wonderful. And I think you've identified quite a lot of interesting areas of common ground. Obviously, Obama and Modi with climate change. In the Trump era, it was more perhaps defense and strategic. There was, I think, some alignment, although very different approaches on the idea of globalization as well, with the US quite actively, in my view, taking a wrecking ball to the World Trade Organization and other institutions. Prime Minister Modi instead calling for a human-centric globalization and wanting to use opportunities to accelerate needed reform to demonstrate that human centricity. And different views in terms of the ultimate goal, but certainly some shared perhaps similarities about the short term of the need for change in any sense. With Biden, as you said, we've seen a return back to Paris climate. I'd like to get to that, but the first question I wanted to ask you was about the free and prosperous Indo-Pacific. We've seen President Biden retake up the US presidency. He's obviously got a strong commitment to security as well. I think there's broad recognition that the Indo-Pacific is what the transatlantic was in the 20th century, and that is the global engine for growth. Therefore, the need in this region to be as stable and prosperous as possible, I think all of us share that sentiment and commitment. There's been another change, of course, in the US presidency, but also in Japan. After a very long period of Abe at the helm, we now have Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga as well. Do you think these changes will be changing the dynamics of the Quad or Indo-Pacific relations more broadly? Or from an Indian perspective, can we expect to see either a similar approach or perhaps even more commitment in the region?
Look, it's too early to talk about what the approach of the Biden administration would be. But from all that we've heard, including in the recent conversation the new Secretary of Defense had with the Japanese Defense Minister, which I've just read newspaper reports of that, the commitment to the Quad and to the Indo-Pacific and to the emerging architecture, which has been strengthened under President Trump, but was actually built in the Obama years, to be fair. I maybe actually going back to the Bush years in some cases, because Quad first emerged in the Bush years. That commitment still seems to be there and still seems to be robust, and there seems to be realism about, as you said, the Indo-Pacific being what the Atlantic was at the end of the Second World War. And while the Atlantic geography, as it were, the transatlantic geography, has a fairly robust institutional architecture. The institutional architecture, the security arrangements, and the institution building in the Indo-Pacific is still at an emerging stage. There is ASEAN, of course, and ASEAN centrality, something we all recognize. But I suspect we are at the beginnings of a process of institution building, which will continue for the next maybe 10 or 20 years. And many platforms, many partnerships, many consultative processes, including Quad, will emerge. It's not just what the 4 Quad countries do with each other, it's also what they do individually with other countries, what 2 Quad countries do with the 3rd country, because the Quad countries share certain principles. Now, our endeavor, individually or in partnership with another Quad country or 2 other Quad countries, is to sort of socialize those principles and or institutionalize them perhaps, and bring other partners into this regime of thinking. So I do see both the new Japanese Prime Minister and the Biden administration broadly following in the footsteps of what their predecessors have done, because on the Indo-Pacific, on what's needed in the Indo-Pacific, I don't think there are great divergences or great differences within domestic society in either the US or in Japan.
No, I think in some ways we might have returned more to the genuine commitment to a free and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Certainly, I think there was more concern about the potential for Cold War dynamics to initiate under President Trump. But I think given the grave importance of the Indo-Pacific as an economic engine, that that freedom and prosperity, and yeah, certainly that commitment to security, I think, is one that all the 4 Quad countries share, as well as Quad Plus, you know, thinking about Vietnam, Indonesia, and others. You've spoken about the US-India relationship maintaining its commitment over the years and decades. Australia and India has also enjoyed quite a warm relationship, but increasingly strong over the past few years. As you know, I'm a former diplomat to India, and I recall in 2014, we said the relationship's never been stronger, with 2-way prime ministerial visits, with the Australian Prime Minister coming to India, Tony Abbott at the time in 2014, and Prime Minister Modi going on to Australia for our hosting of the G20, followed by a broader bilateral visit. 2015, I think we heralded that the relationship had never been stronger. 2016, 2017. In 2020, we had a global year of interruption. And yet again, the Australia-India relationship had never seemed stronger, with our foreign minister coming to present at the Raisina Dialogue, our prime minister at the time, unfortunately unable due to our bushfires. We still did a incredible trade delegation, the Australia-India Business Exchange in February 2020, which I think was the last major visit before COVID hit. We then went on to have the virtual Prime Ministerial Summit in June, Prime Minister Modi's first virtual summit, which I think was exciting for both of us, but not just the limelight on which that shone on the relationship, the commitment to genuine, deep and abiding relations, including the comprehensive strategic framework. We've seen us cooperate on shared goals and responsibilities, including in education, technology, cybersecurity, as you've mentioned, being a major problem, and of course, health. One area in which Australia is yet to make stronger public binding commitments is in climate change. Given Prime Minister Modi's commitment to climate change, the UK hosting the Conference of the Parties this year, and President Biden's commitment to climate change as well, do you think that India would be looking to see more commitments from Australia in 2021 on this important issue, particularly on the idea of green rebuilding, as you mentioned?
Well, I think we all need to show more ambition in terms of the climate question. And as I said, the post-COVID challenge, the fact that there will be economic rebuilding and restructuring of supply chains, rebuilding of infrastructure to make it more COVID or pandemic resilient or pandemic proof in a sense. The fact that there will be such investments means we have to ensure that they take into account climate sensitivities. So we all need to show greater ambition. India does, so does Australia. In terms of what India and Australia can do together and what we're looking at from Australia, Australia is very important to the diversification of India's energy mix. We import gas from Australia, and we could import more. Uranium is there in the background somewhere, and at some point it is a ball we'll pick up because. And of course, we are both founders of members of the International Solar Alliance, and especially in terms of storage technology and innovation in that area, and in further driving down prices of solar power hardware, innovating and building capacities. There's also green finance, which is long-term green finance for sustainable and climate-friendly projects. Australia, with its pension funds and with its long-term funds, is a geography and a country we're looking at very, very carefully, and we would certainly invite great Australian interest. There are many Australian institutions and banks that have enormous experience in this, but I think we are still at in the upper 10% of the iceberg. 90% of the iceberg remains unexplored. And in all of these areas, I think there's a lot we can do together. And just to tell you how connected India's development and its global climate ambitions are. When we import gas from a country like Australia, what happens to this gas? it's actually, if you look at one of our big domestic programs has been the Ujjwala program, which has replaced coal and wood-fired ovens and stoves in 80 million households, covering about 400 million people, with cooking gas, which is, you know, LNG being changed to LPG. Okay. So you have gas imports, which are more eco-friendly than coal, being used to replace domestic coal and wood-fired stoves, and therefore saving trees. They come into 80 million households and help predominantly women, because homemakers tend to be women in our part of the world. That's not something that gives me great satisfaction, but that's the way it is. It also has a health impact, because suddenly you have people at home, men and women, not taking in, you know, black smoke, which it has an impact on gender empowerment and health, especially health of women. So it's all interlinked, and it all leads up to achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's not different silos. It's not that we expect Australia to do this on climate change for itself. Everything is just so interlinked that greater climate investments in Australia by Australians will end up having an impact in some sort of a, you know, butterfly effect manner on a rural household in India.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to have drawn everything together. I thank you very much. That was a lovely holistic response that demonstrates how both climate change really does underpin a number of indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly health, as you mentioned, and gender empowerment as well. You also related climate change back to our trade and economic and investment relationship. And of course, we are delighted that the Australia Economic Strategy was launched by Minister Goyal just in December, which highlighted, in fact, not just gas as part of the energy mix and uranium, as you mentioned, but also cobalt and lithium and other precious metals that can underwrite India's own commitment to Atmanirbhar Bharat in the electronic motor vehicles industries, which will hopefully see more renewable energy motor vehicles as well. And again, using Australian resources. So that's a lovely way to bring all of these issues together. And I thank you very much once again for your time. It looks like we're seeing 2021 to be certainly a lot rosier than 2020. And I think, and I hope that a lot of the lessons we've learned from 2020 will underwrite our commitments in 2021 for a brighter 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.